Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with the first installment of my Clionadh review. So today I'm going to tackle all of the deep iridescent multichromes, but before we jump into that, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. But let's just start going through the 5 shades that are in this bundle. So I have most of my Clionadh shades in here. There's 3 missing because they couldn't fit in this palette, but these are what all of the shades look like, and the 5 we're going to tackle today are here on the second row. It's these 5 shades right here. So this pinky shade called Vermillion, we have this orangey shade called Burnt Sienna, we have Ochre, and then Verte, and lastly Azure. So those are the 5 shades we're going to tackle today, and I have taken some footage with swatches because since there are multichromes they can be a bit tricky to catch on camera, but I have found, and I heard from other people as well, that they are easier to catch with your phone camera, and obviously then you can maneuver and move it around easier. So that's what I have done with most of these shades as well as the comparisons. So what we're going to go through today is obviously all the shades and kind of the shifts and things like that, and then we're going to move into comparisons with more kind of mainstream brands that I'm guessing most of you have in your collection. But we're going to start with the basics and go through the 5 shades and then move into comparisons later on. So I do have a swatch video of all of the 5 shades, so I'm going to start going through these shades, and while I discuss them I'm going to show you that footage rolling as well. So all of these shades are part of the deep iridescent multichrome bundle, and I picked this up in the bundle, which gives you a slight discount on the price. The bundle itself retails for 85 Canadian dollars, but while I go through the shades I'm going to go through the individual prices because they do vary a little bit depending on the shade you pick up. Unfortunately at this time Clionadh's shop is closed, so I can't actually go into their website and look what the description of these shades are, but from what I remember they are described as having a transparent base and shifting between different colors. So compared to some of the other multichromes in their collection, this one, like I said, has a transparent base, similarly to the iridescent glitter multichromes and the regular iridescent series 1 and series 2 multichromes as well. These were originally targeted for people with deeper skin tones, so obviously having the iridescent multichromes that have more of a white to transparent base, they wanted to create something that were more suitable for deeper skin tones. But I feel like these are absolutely stunning on any skin tone, and I have actually been loving these so much, and I would probably say that they are some of my favorite shadows from the whole collection that I picked up, and I think I picked up 35 shades in total. So I definitely recommend these no matter what skin tone you have. But we're gonna start jumping into the different shades. So here you can see the swatches of all of the shades. So in order we have the first one, which is Vermillion, then next to that we have Burnt Sienna, and obviously next to that as well we have Ochre, which is a yellow shade, and then Verte and Azure. I would say that the shifts in these eyeshadows are a bit different, so some of them are stronger than others, and that is somewhat dependent on the shifts that they have, so what colors they have, because obviously colors that are close together will appear less strong when you have them in different lighting compared to some that are a bit stronger just because of the nature of the shifts. But that is the basics of the 5 shades. I'm going to start going through them and discussing them individually, and like I said, I will compare them to both some of the Clionadh shades that I have. I don't have all of the stained glass collection, so obviously I won't be able to compare all of the shades in the range, but I will compare them to the ones that I have, and I do have 35 shades in total like I mentioned. So we're gonna start with the first shade, which is Vermillion. Again, I can't pull up the description of this shade because the website is currently on maintenance, or the shop is closed because they are restocking. I have heard that they will reopen at the end of November, so if you're looking to pick something up, then you can look at their website then, and also you can sign up to their email notifications so you will know when they open, or if you just follow them on Instagram if you want to have some more information. But I know that preliminarily it's going to be end of November, although the date isn't set yet. But let's move back to the eyeshadow. So the first shade, like I said, is Vermillion, and I would describe this as a hot pink to slightly orange, moving into yellow, gold, and then green. So this has quite a lot of shifts in it, and this is actually one of my favorite shades in the range. I think this is just a stunning shade, and when I have this shade on in kind of natural lighting or with the ring light, you will be able to see the pink mainly, but in different lightings you can definitely see it moving into that yellowness and then the green. I would say that the most subtle shift in this is the orange, but it does have that slight orangey tint to it in certain lightings. So with this eyeshadow I wanted to compare it to 2 shades from the Clionadh range that I have, which is one of the deep iridescent multichromes, which is the ones with a black base, and that is the shade Forge, and then the glitter multichrome in the shade Blaze. So those are the two I wanted to compare because they both have kind of a pink to green shift in certain manners. I would say the Forge one goes to more of a kind of forest green or like an emerald green, whereas the Blaze goes more into like a gold rather than a bright green. So they are slightly different, but you will see in the swatches as well that they do have some similarities, although they are definitely not the same. And I feel like, if anything, the ones that are the most similar in this comparison is definitely Vermillion and Blaze. Now let's move on to the comparison of the more kind of mainstream brands. So I wanted to compare it to some other eyeshadow that I have in my collection. I currently don't have too many indie brands in my collection, so I can't compare it to any of those, and these are the first multichrome eyeshadows that I'm trying. So these are comparisons with brands like Colourpop, Anastasia, Juvia's Place, things like that. But I have included all of my palettes in my collection to see what is similar. So if you have any of these shades, maybe it will be helpful you to see how the shift compares to those eyeshadows. And what I've tried to do with these comparisons is kind of use the main shift. So in this one it is pink, and then if I had some shades that kind of shifted into more of a gold pink, those were ideal. So here you can see I compared it to 5 shades, and I think this is the one that was easiest to find kind of dupes for. They're definitely not complete dupes, but they are similar. And you can see the first one that is next to Vermillion is Suba, which is from the Magic Mini palette. And then next to that we have the Anastasia Amrezy palette in the shade Anastasia. Next to that is the Anastasia Norvina palette in the shade Wild Child. Then I have actually one shade from my newest palette, which is the Nikki Tutorials and Beauty Bay collaboration in the shade Roxy Catan. And then lastly we have the Makeup Geek shade in Mai Tai. So you can see the comparisons on the screen, and I'm obviously going to show you the shades that I'm talking about close up as well. So just to give you kind of the comparison, that is the starting shade that we're talking about. It is Vermillion. So you can see that the main shift in this is the pink, because that's what shows up when you have the light shining straight on it. But we're gonna show you what the other shades that I talked about were, just to see kind of, obviously you saw the comparison swatches, but I wanted to show you close-ups as well and talk a bit more on how they differ. So the first shade I'm gonna talk about comes from the Juvia's Place palette, and the shade that I think is the most similar in this is the shade Suba right here. This one is not the most similar in the swatches. This one still has that gold shift to it, but the shade itself is slightly deeper and slightly more dustier than the Clionadh shade. But I still wanted to include it because it is one of those pinks with a gold shift in it. So that is the first shade that I wanted to include as a comparison. The second shade that I talked about comes from the Amrezy palette from Anastasia. And this is probably the shade that I would say is the closest to the actual shade from Clionadh. And that is the shade Anastasia right here. I would say that the tone of pink is quite similar, and then it has quite a strong gold shift to it as well. You can definitely see the gold shift in the monitor, but if I shift it to the side you can definitely see the pink base. So I would definitely say this is the closest one. However, this is definitely missing that green shift to it. If you're looking for something to give a similar effect, obviously not being a multichrome, I would say that this is probably the best option that I have. The next shade in comparison came from my Norvina palette, and that is the shade Wild Child right there. So you can see that it's also like a pink color, and again I would say the bright shade of the shift is very similar to the shade, which is why I wanted to include it. This one definitely doesn't have as much shift to it, but it does have that slight gold tint to it. But when you saw in the comparison, it's not as impactful, for example, as the Amrezy shade. But I think it's still a good option if you do have this palette, because straight on it's going to give quite a similar pink tone. But obviously when you turn your head around, it's not going to have that shift. The second to last shade I'm comparing it to comes from my Nikki Tutorials and Beauty Bay palette, and that is the shade Roxy Catan. Again, this is a pink to gold shift, you can see it there. The only difference with this one is, again, it's definitely deeper than the shade from Clionadh. This one I would say is again a bit more rosier, a bit use it deeper. So I wouldn't say this is the best comparison, although the reflectiveness of this shade is quite intense, and it does have, like I said, that gold shift to it, although that isn't too intense either. So It is a good option, but it won't give exactly the same effect on the lid as the pink tone is a bit different, but I still want to include it in a comparison because it is that pink to gold shift. The last one is probably the most different one that I have, and that is a duochrome shade from Makeup Geek. This one is in the shade Mai Tai, and I feel like the shift is quite similar, so it has that kind of bright pink to it, and you can see it goes into like a peachy gold yellow shade. Of course it doesn't have the green. I can say that about all of these, none of them have that green shift, but they do go from that pink to gold. However, this one is very subtle, and you can probably see that in the comparison video as well, that this one was just very lackluster compared to the other ones. So it's not the best option, but you can get that pink to gold shift with the shade. And I would say the kind of duochromeness of the pink, so you can see kind of flashes there, again very subtly, but it is a very bright intense pink, which is similar to the Clionadh shade, but this one overall is just so much more subtle. So let's move on to the second shade. This one is in the shade Burnt Sienna. This one is actually a bit similar to the last one, although I would say that the shift kind of goes from a different order. So the main shift in this one is orange, but it does have like a peachy pink shift all the way at the end, and then it also goes into a yellow and then a green. It's an absolute beautiful shade. I'm really impressed with this shade because although all of those shifts lay quite close, so orange to yellow to green, I feel like the shift is very intense still. So like I said, with the pink to yellow to green, the difference is stronger, so it's a higher difference between the pink and the yellow and the green than it is between obviously orange to yellow to green. But the shift in this is very, very intense, and I'm actually going to do a demo later in this video, and I'm going to use this shade on my eyes just to kind of show you how it applies, and you can see it there hopefully. So let's move on to the comparisons again. With this shade, I wanted to compare it to two of the Clionadh shades as well. Similar to the first shade, which is in the shade Kiln, is one of the jeweled multichromes. I think I called them deep multichromes before, but it's jeweled multichromes. So that's the first shade I want to compare it to, and then the second one is Torch. When it comes to the kind of shifts and everything, I feel like this one in general is one that I had quite a hard time pairing. I would definitely say that Kiln is quite similar. It's definitely much deeper, but it does have that green or gold green shift, and also that kind of orange tone in it. But I would say that this one has more red to it, and obviously more of a deeper orange shade. Then when it comes to Torch, I feel like it is kind of the extension of the last shade. So it has the same shift that is at the very end of Burnt Sienna. It has that kind of yellow to orange to pinkish coral, and so similarly to what I said, it's one of the ends of the Burnt Sienna shades, but this one isn't as shifty and it doesn't have that yellow green in it. Then when it comes to the kind of mainstream brands that I have to compare, I only have two shades to compare. Again, this one was quite difficult to compare as it does have quite a strong shift in it, but I wanted to go for that main shift, which is that orange to gold. So the first shade I compared it to is from the Saharan 2 palette, and it's in the shade Hadia, and then the second shade is from the Sweet Top palette in the shade Melody. So I was actually surprised, like I said, that I couldn't find any more similar shades, but like I said, the first one is the Saharan 2 palette, and in here I picked the shade Hadia, which is this one right here. It definitely looks more bronzy on camera, but I hope you can see in this swatch that I showed you before that it does have that oranginess to it, and it almost has that peachiness to it as well, which is again at the end of the Burnt Sienna shade. But this is probably the one that I would say is the least similar, although none of these are really that similar. I feel like the ones that I had comparing to Vermillion is definitely more similar than these. But yeah, that is the first shade. And then, like I said, the second shade comes from my Sweet Talk palette, and it is the shade Melody. Mine looks a bit different, which I'm going to talk about later, but Melody is this one shade right here, and it is from the original Sweet Talk palette. This one is definitely a bit more similar because it has that orange to gold to it, and I feel like that gold is more strong than in the other shade. So I would say that this one is definitely similar, but not exact. So moving on to another shade that is one of my favorites, and that is the shade Ochre, which is the yellow shade right here. So again, the main shift of this shade is yellow, but it does have like a green to almost blue shift in it. You can definitely see the blue in certain lights. This one is absolutely stunning, and all of the shades are quite close together on the color wheel. I feel like the shift is very strong in this one as well. So with this shade I actually have 3 comparisons, but none of them are from the Jewel Multichrome selection. They are actually, two of them are from the glitter multichrome, and then I have one which is from the hybrid multichrome. So the first shade is Corrosion, which is one of the glitter multichromes, and then in the middle we have Chalice, which is the hybrid multichrome, and at the very end we have the shade Foiling. And out of these three, I feel like Foiling is the one that is most similar. I was actually surprised on how different these were with the undertones and everything. I would say that Ochre is actually one of the brighter ones, and then Chalice is a bit more kind of blue based, so it's more of a kind of not as intense green, going into like a bronzy kind of bluish shade, which is a weird description, but that is what I would say that it's shifted into. And then Chalice is slightly deeper, and it does have more of an olive tone to it, I would say. And then lastly we have Foiling, which I would say is most similar because it has that bright kind of yellowy shift to it, but it's definitely more of a bronze base. For Ochre, I do have three comparison shades from more mainstream brands. The first shade comes from the I Think I Love You palette, and I can't remember what this shade is originally called, but it's the gold in the palette, because I have actually placed mine in the Sweet Talk palette because I rearranged some of my Colourpop palettes, but it is from the I Think I Love You palette. So that is the first shade. The second shade is from the Metropolis palette, and it is in the shade Orium. And then lastly we have one from the Honey palette, again from Colourpop, in the shade Sunburst. So the first shade, like I said, comes from the I Think I Love You palette, but it is housed in my Sweet Talk palette. So the first one, like I said, is this one right here. It's just this gold shade. I would say that this one is kind of close to the brightest shift in the palette. It does have a slight greeniness to it, but I wouldn't say it's shifting at all. It's more of a kind of flatter metallic, but it does have that same tone to it, and that's why I wanted to include this shade. The second shade, like I said, comes from my Metropolis palette, and that is the shade Orium, which is this shade up top here. As you can see, it's kind of like a yellowy green, and I would say that this is probably the shade that is most different compared to the other ones because it doesn't have that bright yellowness to it, and it's definitely more of a kind of bronzy base that shifts into the blue. So it does have that blue shift to it at certain angles, but then it has more of a bronzy to greenish gold shift. So it's not that similar. This one is also much deeper, but it does have that kind of yellow green to blue shift, which is why I wanted to include this. But it is lacking that bright kind of yellow gold. Then the last shade that I have is the Sunburst shade from the Honey palette, and I'm actually panning this at the moment, so I have it in a separate palette, so I have this kind of depotted, but I am going to show you it anyway. So this is what that shade looks like, and it does have quite a similar kind of yellowness to it. It's definitely lacking that green, and it's not as kind of intense as the other one, but it does have a blue shift to it. It's not as intense as the Multichrome, obviously, because it's more of a kind of shimmer, maybe slight duochrome, so it's not nearly as impactful, but I did want to include this because the yellow tone is quite similar and it does have that blue shift. So we have two more shades to go. The next one is the green in the bunch, and that is the shade Azure. This is definitely one of the more shifty ones because it goes from green to like a purple. I will have the kind of footage rolling, but in certain angles this is a bright purple, and then it goes to a blue and then to a green. And in certain angles I would say it's quite similar actually to the next shade we're going to talk about, which is Azure, but this one has even more shifts to it. It's absolutely stunning and I love this shade, and yeah, it's just really shifting. And again, the shift in this shade is quite kind of different. So obviously it goes from a green to a blue, which isn't, I mean, that far from each other, but then it goes to that kind of bright, almost fuchsia purple, which is very different. So it does have that stark difference in the shift, which I absolutely love. With this one, I actually only have one shade that I want to compare it to from the Clionadh range. I couldn't really find any similar shades in the Glitter Multichrome range, and the only shade that I found similar was the shade Ochre, which is one of the jeweled Multichromes. So with Ochre, you can definitely see that kind of blue to purple quite a lot. In certain lights it does show up very green. I don't think it kind of caught that on camera that well in the footage, but I have worn this on camera before, and when I have it in my ring light or in direct sunlight it shows very green, which is why it's quite similar to Verte. I would say the main shift in Verte is almost like a more kind of green leaning slightly more yellow, whereas Ochre is a bit more leaning blue, and then it has that blue to purple, and I would say the tone of purple is quite similar, but obviously Ochre is much deeper because they have that black base, and then Ochre has kind of an extended shift which is a bit more yellow, which is lacking in Verte. So Verte, I would say, is definitely the hardest one to find comparisons for. I couldn't find anything that is similar much at all. Some of them have that greenness to it, but none of these have shifts. So I used picked shades that had a similar green tone to them. I do have quite a few greens in my collection, but I could only find 3 that was quite similar in the shift, so that's why I included these. Again, it has that kind of bright green to it, but none of the shift. So the 3 shades that I included is, first of all, from the Magic Mini palette from Juvia's Place in the shade Mali. Then we have the Masquerade Mini palette also from Juvia's Place in the shade Buso. And then lastly, the Just My Luck shade in Big Bangs. So again, to show you, the first shade comes from my Magic Mini palette, and it is the green shade in the palette, which is this one right here. Again, it's really hard to say which of these are the most similar because they are slightly different, these 3 greens, but I would say none of them are super similar. So that is at least the first shade. It's slightly kind of lighter and brighter than some of the other ones, but yeah, the first one comes from this palette. Then the next one comes from the Masquerade palette. This is definitely the deeper end of the bunch, and this is in the shade Mali, as you can see right here. This one is probably the one with the least blue in it as well, so I would say maybe this one is the most different, but it is so hard to tell with these greens because, again, I wouldn't really recommend any of these as an alternative for the Verte shade. And then lastly, we have the Just My Luck palette, and perhaps this one is the one that is most similar because it does have a slight kind of yellow shift to it. Hopefully you can see that there, but this one is Big Bangs, as you can see, and it is, I mean, it is a green with a similar tone to it, but again, it wouldn't be a good replacement in my opinion. So I feel like we breezed over that Verte shade, and I don't feel like that goes justice because, like I said, this is one of my favorite shades out of all of these. But since I didn't have very many comparisons to it, yeah, just quickly to go through. But that leads us into the final shade in this bundle, which is the shade Azure. Azure is this blue shade right here, and I would say this is quite similar to Verte, like I said, in a certain way, because it does have that same blue shift to it, and it leads into a purple. So the purple and blue shift is quite similar, but it's lacking the rest of the shifts. I feel like the shifts and everything, the impact of the shade is reflected in the price because this is actually the cheapest of the bundle. I didn't include any of the prices, so I forgot to mention it when I went through everything, but every shade apart from Azure retails for 20 Canadian dollars, and then Azure costs 12, so it's definitely less expensive than the rest, and I feel like that can show in the shade as well because this is definitely the most subtle out of all of them. So I wanted to include 3 shades from Clionadh in the comparisons, and I would say none of these are exact, but some of them are definitely more similar than others. The first shade is Rosette, which is one of the jeweled multichromes, so it has that black base again. The second shade is Carving, which is one of the glitter multichromes, and then thirdly we have another glitter multichrome, which is in the shade Chandelier. So with these 3, I would definitely say Rosette obviously have that black base, so it's much deeper, and it definitely has more of that purple compared to the blue. Also, I would say that this one is definitely more shifty because it has that yellowness to it at a certain angle. So I would recommend that, although I wouldn't say that these compare much at all. Azure is definitely closer to the glitter multichrome, both in formula as well as shades. So the next one up was the shade Carving, which has more of a terracotta base, which Azure is lacking. So again, this is quite different, but it does have that blue purple shift to it. Then lastly we have the shade Chandelier, which I would say is the closest one. This one is lighter than Azure, and it's, I would say, more shifty, but it does have that kind of taupey purple base and then a blue, almost green shift to it. So that's an absolutely stunning shade, and I would say that that is probably the closest one to Azure. For Azure, I have 3 comparisons from kind of mainstream brands, and one of them is kind of not a specific shade, but we'll get to that in a second. The first 2 ones are both from Nabla, and the first shade is in the shade Absinthe, the second one is in the shade Alchemist, and then lastly we have one of those typical blue-brown pigments. I just wanted to include that to share you kind of the comparison because I feel like that's something that most people have in their collections. This one that I have is a mix between MAC Club and the blue-brown pigment in the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. So although this one is one of the less impactful ones from Clionadh, I found it quite hard to find a similar shade in my collection, and that just might be because I don't own that many blue eyeshadows. Blue isn't really a shade that I go for very often, but I have except 3 options. So the first one was Absinthe from Nabla. As you can see, this one has definitely more of a terracotta base, and then, or like yeah, I would say a terracotta bronzy base moving into a bluish green. At certain angles as well, you can see that it's purple, so yeah, hopefully you can see that that's terracotta base, the blue, and then the purple, hopefully. So this one has a similar shift to it, but it's definitely less intense. It doesn't have as much pigment to it, and that terracotta base shows up more than anything. So although this has similar shift to it, it's not as impactful, and I wouldn't say this is the best option, because on the eyes you will mainly see that base shade, which isn't even part of the Azure shade. The next shade up is from the same range, and this one is in the shade Alchemy. This one I would say is perhaps a better option, although it does have that kind of terracotta base again, but it does have that blue purple shift to it. I feel like similar to the other one, the purple shift shows up better in certain lighting, and then certain lighting you can see the terracotta base. So it's actually quite similar to Absinthe, although this shade is definitely more intense. The shift is more intense on the eyes and in the swatch, but it is definitely more purple leaning than blue, and obviously it isn't a multichrome either. And then, like I said, I of course wanted to include that Brew Brown pigment, which is this one right here. This one's actually surprisingly similar. So this has that brown base to it, which shows up quite deep in the swatch and on the eyes, which the Azure shade doesn't have. But I feel like this would be a good base shade, and then topping it with Azure would be amazing, because the shift is actually closer, like I said, than I thought. It does have the same kind of blue shift to it, although not nearly as intense. So those were the 3 comparisons that I have for Azure. So that wraps up the kind of comparisons of all the shades. I hope I did a good job showing off the shifts and everything. I did try to put in some extra work to this video just so you can get a good idea of all the shades, but I'm gonna do the demo now, and like I said, I'm gonna use the shade Burnt Sienna, which is the orange shade right here. So I specifically went for an all matte look today so that I could top what I'm wearing with this shade. Just to note, I do have a kind of matte shade on my lid, so it is set, but I'm gonna spray the brush and hopefully it will apply decent anyway. I do use glitter glue sometimes, but I didn't want to do that in this video because it would create more of a mess. So I literally just using this on a set base, damp, and the brush I'm gonna use is just a random brush that I've had for ages, but it's one of these kind of flat, slightly fluffier brushes, and I feel like these pick up these shades quite well, especially the glitter ones. Although I do definitely like spraying the brush. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see me applying this shade. So when you do pick up this on the brush, I would just say kind of put the brush down and swipe very gently back and forth rather than digging, because they are quite soft shadows. So I do just have this on the brush now, and I have this sprayed too. So hopefully you can see the eyeshadow there now. But like I said, I'm going to just apply this, and I have a mirror down here, and I'm going to apply this all over my lid. So I'm hoping you can see it there. I wouldn't say this is applying the absolute best, and I think that's because I have my lid set. But I'm just gonna build this up a bit and kind of continue seeing if I can build it. Because I feel like with these, I usually try to apply thin layers and build if I need. And obviously with the base being set, I feel like it's a bit harder to apply it. But that is it on one eye, so I'm going to apply it on the other eye, and I will be right back. So there you have it on the lids. I feel like obviously since it is an orange to yellow to green, it's not the most subtle shade, but I feel like it's still quite a wearable shade. But if I close my eye and turn my face a bit, I'm hoping you can see the green on the outer corner. I did actually apply it all the way out to see, hopefully you can see the shift. Again, it's just really hard to capture on camera, but I can definitely see it in real life. If I can catch it on camera with my phone after filming, kind of twisting around to see if I can catch it, I will insert that footage now so you can see what the shift looks like on the eyes, because you can definitely see it in different lighting, although it is notoriously hard to capture on camera. But there you guys was all for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. It was really fun to film and kind of find comparisons in my collection, and I feel like going through all of these shades and trying to find dupes in my collection, I just started valuing these shades even more because I literally have nothing like them in my collection already. So like I said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know what you think of this series down below. I'm definitely going to do the rest, and I do have quite a few shades, and I'm especially dreading doing the glitter multichrome because I have quite a few of those, so I might do that in 2 parts because I know this video is going to be very, very long. But other than that, I hope you're having an amazing day, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye guys.